Hi, everyone. Yeah, that's fine. So my name is Narasimhan. Oh, yay. All right. Can we have a good shout out for Calvin and Hobbes? Everything I do is for them. My people. All right. Hi, everyone. My name is Narasimhan. And today I want to talk to you about the Pharos of progressive web apps. Yeah, I absolutely picked this title because it's alliterative and it makes it look cool. But I actually have a really, really hard job because of three things. One, there have been amazing speakers that came before me, so I'm like, oh my god. Second, this is the first time I'm giving this talk. And third, my job today is to get you excited about a tool that every time you run it is going to tell you what a crappy programmer you are. No pressure, I know. And this is why we need Lighthouse. So you might be asking, okay, what is this Pharos thing? So for the history nerds in the audience, the term Pharos actually comes from the fact that legend has it that Ptolemy built the lighthouse at Alexandria, one of the ancient wonders of the world. He built that because there's this island called Pharos where the people who lived there were shipwreckers. And they kept like plundering all this stuff. So he built this giant lighthouse with the idea that it could kind of, bring the ships into safe harbor. And it became such a representative symbol that Pharos became the name for lighthouse, which is the etymological word, for most of the languages in that space. So it's actually called the Pharos of Alexandria. History lesson done. So a little bit about me. You can find me at Nithya. It tells you a lot that I've been around so long that I own my name and have the social media sites, I know. But I've actually been around for over 2 decades, and I started out in research. I have a PhD in computer engineering, and I did a lot of work for over a decade at Motorola, building kind of advanced concepts for their mobile and web and television platforms. But it's only been the past a few years that I've kind of pivoted away, and I do 2 different things. The first is development. I'm an independent developer. I work with a lot of small startups and businesses and universities and communities in the mobile and web space. But I kind of look at it from the sense, and this is why I'm also here, that more than just kind of building stuff, it's important to help people translate awareness of all these new technologies into something that's actionable, right? Either help improve a feature or even just help someone skill up and improve their career. And that kind of leads me to my third hat, which is advocacy. I like doing public speaking. I'm not good at it, perhaps, but I like it. And I also run a community in New York, the Google Developer Group in New York City. It's 6,500 members and one of the fastest growing meetups. And I'm also a Google Developer Expert and Flutter. The only reason I say that is a lot of my thinking in the space is very much influenced by how Google has brought about a bunch of things there. And so I want to start by saying, the thing that kind of motivates this entire conversation is, I forgot to start my timer, so I'm going to talk for 5 minutes extra. All right. The thing that motivates us all is perf matters, right? At the end of the day, it's about performance. What is it that I have to do to make sure that my app is not only usable, but it's actually fun to work with? And this site called Think with Google is really nice if you haven't checked it out, because it has a ton of metrics and benchmarks that you can use to just evaluate how you stack up in the current ecosystem. But what's interesting is there are 3 metrics in there that I kind of want to highlight. The first one is this data point, which most of you probably know, which is that 53% of mobile site visitors will abandon a page if you take longer than 3 seconds to load. So it's like 1, 2, 3, boom. 1 in every 2 people's gone if you haven't got your page up and running and interactive, right? And that's a tough thing to beat. But the additional thing that was interesting is because Google has a ton of data on conversion rates and bounce rates and all of that, they fed all this to a neural network, and they have it predict, right? Given a website, given something that I know about the load time, predict what's the bounce rate, what's going to be the conversion rate. And it predicted that, okay, at 3 seconds you're losing half your audience, but by 10 seconds you lost them all and then some, right? It's like, not only do you lose them, they're going to go and tell people how horrible you are. That's how bad you are, right? Oh yeah, we know who you are. The third part was also in the same study. It's like, it gets worse when you think about conversion rates, because conversion is where you want the user to interact with the impactful things on your site, right? But it turns out that as you add more elements to your web page, kind of slowing things down, as that number grows, your ability to convert them drops. So you're going to get closer to 0. So you look at all this and you're like, oh yes, all right, you sold us, we need web performance. And web performance is easy, right? So this next slide is my all-time favorite meme, and it was put up by Adios Fani at I/O, and it says, fixing web performance is as easy as drawing a horse. We all know this meme, but this one is really, really strikes at the core for me for everything web development, right? because this is how literally we're taught to do everything. It's like, oh, okay, I'm going to give you guidelines. Step 1, go install this. Step 2, write a bunch of code to run tests. Step 3, you've got like, some guidelines I'm going to give you. Oh, we don't know what happens between 4 and 5, but look at how good my app is and look at how crappy yours is. The devil is in the details between 4 and 5, right? And the thing is, if you look at this from the drawing perspective, it's people who've been doing this all their lives. They have it like intuitively, they know what to do between 4 and 5. Those of us coming into the space, particularly self-taught or coming from different areas, we don't know, and we're like in the woods going, where am I? Where am I lost? What am I doing? And this is where I think it's really kind of excels. Now, the reality is there's a ton of web performance tools. This is just one page that Google's kind of putting out now called Speed Tools, I think. But it's bringing together a bunch of different things that it has that could help you basically analyze and evaluate the performance of your web apps. Tons of tools, right? Because I need all this much more stuff to read, right? But the reality is that they themselves recognize that we need ways not only to know how to use these tools, but to kind of understand how they correlate to each other. And because of that, the one thing, like one kind of segue I want to briefly kind of say is, it's not just important that we have tools and guidances, but we actually need to know how to learn. And I really like this one quote that was from a blog that Scott Hanselman wrote last year, but it kind of surfaced in my mind very recently, which is, when you think about how people learn stuff in the computer science space, there are 2 ways. There are people who learn from the metal up, and then there are people who learn from the glass back. And what does that mean? Now, they explain it different way, but of course, I have full liberty to like interpret it any way I want. So this is my interpretation of it, which is, the metal up is people who are like, hey, I want to understand how this platform works. I know everything about it, all the nuances, so that now when I take my first step building something, I know I'm doing everything exactly right. Yeah, how many of you do that? I didn't think so. The other side is where you've got stuff, right? And the glass back is really talking about the fact that you're talking to the user, you're looking at the user experience. The glass is the screen, and it's like, hey, I'm going to start with what I want to deliver to them as a user experience, and then improve and iterate on that. And that, to me, is how I think about it, right? I've got all these apps I have to build, I've thrown it out there, now I need to know how quickly I can kind of refine and iterate on that. And this is where Lighthouse excels. To me, Lighthouse is the kind of thing that takes step 4 to step 5, takes that leap of faith, and converts it into a bunch of tiny, tiny iterative steps that can tell me how to fix them one by one. And so, for the rest of this talk, I'm actually going to focus on 4 parts. Hopefully, we'll get through it in time. The first part is like, just a sense of what is Lighthouse, right? What's the history of it? Where did it come from? What is the goal? Second, a quick look at how you would actually use Lighthouse. I know there was a PWA talk before, so hopefully you've seen some of this. But in general, there's a lot of new stuff coming down the pipe, so I want to kind of make you aware of that. Third is under the hood, like how does it work, right? Okay, you see the reports, but how does it work? And last but not least, we're going to keep this for the end so that we spend as much time as we can. What do you learn from that report, right, once it's generated? So far, so good? I can't even see. Yes, okay, I see one. All right, cool. So what is Lighthouse? Lighthouse is a tool from the Google Chrome team, and we've already talked about what it does. It's going to provide audits on your web app to tell you where you're failing or like where you might do better. But to me, the 2 important things in this are it's open source and automated, right? It's open source, meaning for me, anytime I want to kind of think about, hey, they're running a bunch of tests, they're doing a bunch of evaluations, scoring it, I want to know why they're doing it. Like, what is the secret sauce? And you can go check that out. The automation is actually the thing that makes it important, right? Because it means that now I can incorporate it into my developer workflow in a way that makes sense. Brief history, Lighthouse hasn't been around for a long time. It started in 2016 when Paul Irish basically spoke about it at the Chrome Dev Summit. At that time, it was literally just a little extension that would kind of run very simple checks on your web page and give you an automated report. Very simple, right? It was very, very much in its infancy. To me, it really took on seriousness in 2017 when V2 came out. And the things that made V2 really, really nice is 2 things, right? One is they now went from like a couple of audits to a huge slew of them, 4 categories. You could audit for performance, you could audit for progressive web apps, you could audit for accessibility, and for best practices. And they filled it out with a ton of things that, the guidance that they've been giving were now tests that were running for you. But most importantly, and this was very appealing to me, they allowed you to do custom audits. So in addition to the things that they saw as best practices, you as somebody who's a domain expert might say, well, this is all well and great, but this is the one conversion button that I need to be super, super performant on, and I want to have another audit check on that, right? You could inject that in. 2018 has taken that a leap forward. So in 2018, in May of this year, they released V3. And V3's got a bunch of things that we're going to kind of talk about briefly. But the kind of two big things that stood out to me, in addition to the fact there are more audits, is one, there is now an API. It's not public yet, you got to apply for access, but there's an API. Why am I so excited about it? Because till now you have to run these audits manually, right? You have to go to a page and kind of click on it, know what configuration you're running, test it against all these configurations. You are doing all the donkey work. That was not political, sorry. But the other side of the API integration is now I can actually put it into my continuous integration workflow. I can do other things, right? I can use that to run audits. I can run a cron job that tests it out against different configurations, that tests it out against competitor sites. Get all the data, dump it in a database, and do something with it to get me a better understanding. So I think that's cool. There are two other things. We'll talk about Project Lantern later, but I'll just mention briefly the Chrome User Experience Report. I can't see, so I don't know how many of you have actually seen this, but this is basically Google taking like all the data they have from performance for about, I think, 4 million data sets, data records they have, it could be more. This is real world sites and performance audits on real world sites. And they made it available in a BigQuery data set so you can actually analyze it. Why is this important? Because it's one thing to say this is what you should be doing. It's another thing to know that this is achievable in the real world. And more importantly, it's another thing completely to know, hey, my competitor has already got to this stage, how do I actually stack up? So Lighthouse has currently V3, more than 100 audits. These are the high-level categories. You have performance, where you're focusing on really the speed at which you render the screen, how quickly it becomes interactive. Progressive web apps, for those of you not familiar with it, is really focusing on kind of checking off on the PWA checklist. And PWAs, the way I always think about them is they are a bunch of best practices or guidelines that you can adopt if you want your web app to be competitive with native apps on a mobile device. So these would be things like, does it work offline? Does it use HTTPS? Does it have, the little kind of at the home screen manifest? All those kind of things, that's what it tests there. Accessibility, they're all familiar with, but the focus there is usability, right? Is it usable by the dominant portion of the population that we're targeting? Best practices in SEO, I'm not going to go into too much, other than to say that they're both equally important if you're running production apps. Best practices is really code optimizations and looking at, are you, the way you implemented your application, minification, all those kind of things, are you doing the right thing? SEO is, do you have the right kinds of metadata in your header? Have you got it indexable so that you've got search engine optimization? When you're all done, Lighthouse generates a report. And the two big things, apparently this is the #1 request in Lighthouse V2, which is, hey, you give us all this data, but we can't really make sense of it. So the big thing that happened this year is they have visual feedback, so it's color-coded, scores very highly visible, and then you can drill down interactively. So how do you use it? Today, there's actually 4 ways in which, if you don't count the fifth one, which is the API, there are 4 ways in which you can get started using Lighthouse. And this is important to know because historically, the first one, which is the Chrome extension, was the one everyone used. It's still available, but really, almost everyone now goes to using the Chrome DevTools version. So, after this is done, we're going to switch for a second and see if we can actually see those in action. But with Chrome DevTools, there's an audit tab. You just go to the audit tab, set the configuration you want, and run it on the web page. Generates an audit report. You can drag that report down into a viewer and look at it. And both of these, in some sense, rely on the fact that you have a Chrome browser, right? But what if you're someone who likes command line, or you don't necessarily want to use that browser? Well, there is a Node CLI version. You can use npm or yarn, install Lighthouse on your desktop environment, and run it from command line. There's one other value proposition, or one other advantage to that approach, to be quite honest, which is it's actually one click. The ones on this side, you run it, you get a report, you can drag the report into a viewer, view it, multiple steps. Here, you kind of change the whole thing. It completes the audit and automatically launches the viewer, so it kind of feels very seamless. Last but not least, for those of you familiar with Web Page Test, Web Page Test is an online service that lets you take a URL and kind of actually look at real world, in the field, in the wild performance data, right? Because they'll run it on browsers around the world on different devices. Web Page Test now allows you to run Lighthouse through that kind of path that is listed there, where in addition to what it already does, it also gives you a Lighthouse score and some audit trails. So let's kind of do a quick demo. This is where, very scary. All right, so we're going to see many ways in which you can launch an audit. Can you actually see this? It's Kelvins everywhere. I hope you can read it. But option one is I can actually run Lighthouse from the command line. So here all I've done is, yeah, and I'm totally going to audit the EmpireJS site because obviously, I want to make enemies here before I go. I want to run it from here, and I want to show a couple of things later. We're not going to stick around till it's done, but you'll see that the first thing that happens when I run the audit is it launches the browser, it launches a tab, and then if you kind of watch for a few seconds, it'll flicker. It'll kind of like do multiple passes of the website page, and then it's going to keep generating this. And for each one, it's kind of taking notes on how much time it takes. We're not going to stick around till the whole thing is done. We'll let it be here, and in the meantime, we will go and do one other thing. And this is mostly to show you what, all right, build a schedule site. So this is just to show you what that site looks like. So here you saw version 1, and now version 2 is instead of the command line, you can actually go into the audits panel here. You can inspect it, and you can see that you can set your configuration for whatever you want to do, and then run the audit, and you'll get a report too. Now, in the interest of, I feel like a cooking show. Oh, magically everything got done, right? So you'll see that right now. Let's see if I can. All right, so when I ran it from command line, it runs it on a mobile device emulated, and it gives me, I told you I was going to make enemies, 42 performance, oh my God. All right, it's not that bad. It turns out, and I'm going to go back to full screen right now. Oh, sorry, one last thing. So it turns out, and I ran these by myself earlier, you can actually, if you run the one from the Lighthouse Chrome DevTools, you get a report file, you can drop it into the viewer, and you'll see this one says 98, right? You're like, wait, how is that? The command line one showed you a 44, and this showed you 98. That's because of what it does differently. If you look at this one is actually checking this out on a desktop with a different configuration, different network value. And this is Lighthouse 3.0.3. The other one was 3.1. We'll come back and look at all these later, but I'm keeping an eye on the time. So the big thing I wanted to kind of give you a sense of is that it's really, really effortless to run. Go to the website. Once you've got the report run through DevTools, you can drag it into this Lighthouse viewer, and now you get the equivalent of a very simple report. So I'm going to spend a couple of minutes just looking at this particular report, and then we're going to move on, and then if you have time, we'll come back and drill into all the other things later. So this is Lighthouse v3's report. And the thing that if you've been tracking Lighthouse for a while, the first thing you'll notice is this is way more kind of instantly useful to you. Like without even looking at the details, you're just like, am I all greens, all reds, right? Get a gut feeling of where do I have to focus my attention. Second is, you'll see that the performance metrics that we have, right? First contentful paint, first meaningful paint, speed index, first CPU idle, time to interactive, estimated input latency. To a large extent, when you actually run Lighthouse audits, those are the ones you'll focus on. So I lied. This was not only about progressive web apps. You can run this on anything. If you want to make your app progressive, like you want to make it a PWA, then you can look at the other audit trails, but this is the one that's most critical. The second thing is you'll see that there are ranges for all these values, right? Like red means 0 to 49, 50 to 89, 90 to 100. The thing that you kind of need to understand is that the ultimate score, this big score that kind of puts you in one of these ranges, there's still a little bit of magic sauce in here because that is kind of computed for you from an aggregate of all these tiny test scores that you have, where the test scores are then weighted for you, right? So in some sense, tomorrow if you wrote a custom audit, you could influence the score by putting your test and having it contribute to the weight in a particular category. If time permits, we're going to come back and look at drilling down into some of these and figure out what they mean and how we can improve them. But I want to kind of finish my rapid pass through what Lighthouse has got down the road for you. If you kind of scroll down to the bottom of the report, you will actually be able to see what the configuration is. So in this, you can see that this particular version of the audit was run for no emulation, was run on desktop. It does throttling, but there was, it slowed down the CPU. If you look at the mobile one, it'll actually tell you that the processor to memory ratio is worse. So there were other kind of like obstacles, if you will, that were going to impact performance there, which is why that score looked far worse. But you can, now if you have this data and you run this again, you can kind of contrast how your performance is improved or not since your last time. So long story short, you know what Lighthouse is, you kind of know how to get it started. We looked at a couple of examples, the rest are easy to do. Now I want to spend a little bit of time just telling you about how it works. And this is important because if you want to write your own custom audit, then it's useful to know. So hopefully you can kind of make sense of it. All the slides have the links to the stuff on top, so you can go check them out later. But this is really, really kind of cool. So how Lighthouse works is at a very high level, it takes advantage of the DevTools protocol to actually launch a tab with your tests and inject scripts and set the environment for the different configurations and run that page, right, in the browser. But the workflow is actually the top half. You kind of want to think a little bit about that. The first thing it does is gathers, right? So it has these components that what they do is they gather the state for the performance. Whatever metrics you're picking up, the goal is for it to collect the data for that metric from the browser. Someone needs to have written that code. When you run the standard audits, the Lighthouse team has written the code to generate those kind of variables or entities for you. If you write custom stuff yourself, you need to make sure that you define and collect the data for them. But at this point, all that's happened is it's running a test, gathering the data, running a test, gathering data, and then packaging it up into these artifacts. These artifacts are then shipped to the auditing segment, right? And what the auditing thing does is, all it knows till now is this is the state of the performance for running this, right? The audit actually has additional values that say, here's the threshold for good and bad behavior. Here is the score. So the auditing thing looks at the artifacts coming in, checks the thresholds and whether pass, fail, whatever, uses those to score this test. And then, once it's done, it can actually take advantage of whatever weighting system and other things that you've given it to compute a score, create a report, and send it over to the last stage, which is report generation. And it's at this point, you know, like the weights and the aggregation, those are all things that need to be fine-tuned. And the report generation is really about making that, visualizing it to you in a way you can act on it, right? So far so good, hopefully. The reason this is important is once you understand this, there's a report runner, there's a report viewer that in which you can kind of, you know, the generated report can be actually analyzed and visualized. Once you know this, now you understand how you can write a custom audit. And writing a custom audit is like you saying, hey, I know that in my particular domain, the most important thing is the payment part. So I really don't care. I want to boost the weight of the components that kind of complete the, you know, authentication or whatever, right? So if you did that, again, 3 parts. First, you write a custom gatherer. And the way you write a custom gatherer, all of these have links to actual code examples, but we're not going to go into that because there's not much time. You effectively are saying, hey, I'm going to declare the names of the variables that are going to hold this custom data. I'm going to also write the code that Lighthouse calls to go gather it. So when I'm hooked into the system, it's going to gather. I'm going to have the code that gathers the stuff. I'm going to define what those variables are, and then I'm going to have that ready. The custom audit is the class where I'm like, okay, I'm going to define my thresholds for taking the data that I generated here and creating a score based on whatever those thresholds and weights are. And at this point, you should be done. But you're not, because you have one other thing, which is the configuration. This is effectively the most important file in your current custom kind of workflow, because it hooks your custom gatherer and audit components into Lighthouse's workflow, right? So it's like a config file that just says, look for these methods and these variables in this file. Look for custom for auditing and gathering. And by the way, here's how I want you to weight them and what category I want you to kind of roll them into, right? And at this point, once you have this, you can run your custom audits using command line or in DevTools. The command line is one I use, it's super easy. And now you've got yourself an additional report that gets pulled into that. What came out in April of this year, May of this year, is in addition to this, there's now a Lighthouse API. You need to apply for access, but what this does for you is, in addition to kind of like one at a time, you can now create dashboards based on like literally getting the data back in a form that you can store. It's programmatically invoked. Data can be stored and analyzed later. And most importantly, if you kind of want to run cron jobs that look at it from a much broader perspective, because remember, when you run an audit, you're running it against a particular device at a particular point in time in a particular context. This allows you to kind of farm it out and do many things at the same time. So I think this is going to be really powerful, and this checks off wish list item number 2, which was how do I do bulk analysis. So the last and most important thing that came out of like V3, so till now, they've improved the way you can visualize things. They've added more ways for you to start the audits. They've added more ways for you to kind of like, you know, automate the process. But then they had one other problem. And this is where Project Lantern. Project Lantern is just kind of announced this year, which is really super cool, and I want to learn more about it. But what Project Lantern did was recognize that there is a variability in the scores. In other words, if you run the same audit on Lighthouse, based on where you are, what time it is, what device you're on, you're going to get different scores. So how do you tackle a moving target, right? And the reason is it's actually doing a lot of throttling, it's emulating a lot of things. With Lantern, what they said was, hey, what if we were able to kind of amortize some of these things, right? We understand, we can actually analyze the code, figure out what are the static assets, what we estimate. If you tell me what your network conditions are, I can actually model this out. I will model out the environment for different conditions, and I will predict, right? I will actually come up with, instead of just relying on what's observed, I will predict some of these things for various configurations. And now, I'm kind of amortizing the errors that I would have gotten from a single sample point, right? And so this, I think, is going to be powerful. I'm looking forward to understanding a little bit more about it, but Project Lantern is something they're bringing in to reduce variability. They claim it has reduced variability by over 50%. So last but not least, and I have 2 minutes. Yes, okay, we can do this. Hey, I got this far. What did you learn? Hopefully you learned something so far, but now we can kind of look into it and see what's there in the report, right? So I'm going to do this really quickly for just a second, and then we'll kind of wrap up. So this is an interactive report, as you can see. I just pulled the file that came out of there. The first thing is, when you look at it, you can see immediately, oh, by the way, you see these really scrunched up things. I don't know why it is, but when I run it from the DevTools, I always get these, but when you run it from command line, you get beautiful screenshots, so maybe we will look at that for just a second instead. The performance numbers are worse, but you can at least see the screenshots, which helps. Oh, even this one then, I don't have the right one. All right, we're gonna go with this. You can come talk to me later. But the main thing I want you to understand is this. So it's actionable because you can look at the metrics. You immediately can tell that, okay, on performance I'm doing okay. The one thing that didn't work out was input latency. You hover over it, it gives you immediately a link to where you can go to find out more. And what you look at here is now there are various ways in which they're slicing and dicing the performance metrics. First contentful paint is like saying, how long did it take till the first element? It's just like giving the user reassurance. We're doing something, we're loading something. The first element showed up. But first meaningful paint is when did 50% of the above before content get rendered, right? That could take longer. Speed index is not about time, it's about the rate at which you're like updating the site. Like how many assets am I able to render? First CPU idle, on the other hand, is like saying, hey, when was the first time this thing was done doing rendering stuff and had a minute to handle user interaction? And this is actually one of the most frustrating things that people have found, that when you over-optimize for first content paint, but not time to interactive, those users see all this gorgeous stuff, but anytime they tap it, nothing happens, and there's nothing more frustrating than putting candy in a window and putting a glass pane between you and the candy, right? For a bad analogy. Time to interactive is what's the minimum time before I can get to interact with the screen in a way where not only does it respond, but the response time is less than 5 milliseconds or something like that. There's a statistic. And all of these are, they're common sense, but by using Lighthouse, you get actionable ways in which you can fix them. And I'm crossing my 25-minute mark. I probably crossed it a long time ago because I started my timer late, so I'm going to wrap up. Long story short, this is really, really interesting stuff. I have found that going through audits is actually a much better way for me to understand how things are impacting performance than it would like reading documentation. If you want to follow through, documentation is great, but you got to dive in and like drill down on everything. I suggest you watch these 3 videos, which are awesome. This was the first one from Chrome Dev Summit. This is the one where they announced Lighthouse v2. This is from this year where they announced Lighthouse v3. But if you get no time at all, and you have like 30 minutes and that's all you can afford, this is the talk you want to see. Because this is the one that Arya Swanian, I'm not even going to say her last name, did at I/O, where they walk systematically through a real-world application, applying Lighthouse audits, and actually kind of coming up with sensible metrics that you could use to analyze it. So with that, I'm going to wrap up. You can find the slides there. I have a lot more I wanted to say that I will dump in the slides, so you're going to have to read it later, whether you want to or not. But if you are interested in this stuff, do come check us out at GDG New York City, and we'll probably be doing a lot more of this towards the end of this year. Thank you.